All good things. We finally reached the last episode of the series, where it's revealed that the whole show has just been a dream.
See, I was hoping you were going to say just a program on the holodeck. Troy walks out of the holodeck with Worf and talks about how much she liked the program he set up where they were walking on some alien beach, but she still manages to complain about his lack of verboseness in describing it.
He expresses concern about their relationship and her past with Riker, but Troy dismisses him, saying they should focus on the current relationship instead of ones from the past.
Right as they're about to make out, a robed Picard busts in, doing a Michael Biehn impression.
What day is it? The date? What year?
He claims he's moving back and forth through time, and while Troy seemed concerned, Worf's expression was one of annoyance and disbelief, which was humorous considering he himself jumped between a bunch of different dimensions not too long ago.
Picard goes to his quarters and tries to tell Troy about what he experienced, but he can't remember any details.
He says it was like waking up from a nightmare, and it was from before he captained the Enterprise, but then to after he captained the Enterprise, and now he's back to the present.
And as he talks to her, he suddenly finds himself grown old and bearded and hanging out in an orchard. A visorless Geordi shows up, and they reminisce about how long it's been since they worked together on the Enterprise.
Which is 25 years. And Geordi reveals that he's been married to Dr. Brahms, which was a little bit creepy, considering what we've seen.
So we can only conclude that Geordi continued his obsession with her, killed her husband, and then somehow blackmailed her into marrying him. Or this entire episode is going to turn out to be a Geordi holodeck program.
Or he killed the real Dr. Brahms and just treats the holodeck version of her like she's the real one.
Or he just straight up married the holodeck version and doesn't care about anything in reality.
When Picard asks why Geordi is visiting, we find out that Picard has Irumodic syndrome, which is a degenerative neurological condition. And as he's talking to Geordi, he sees some weirdo peasants in the field shouting at him, but only he can see them.
He suddenly finds himself before Season 1 with Tasha Yar heading for the Enterprise for his first time. He seems confused and says Yar looks familiar.
Before he shifts back to the present with Troy, scared and disoriented. And in sickbay, Beverly says she didn't find anything that would cause hallucinations, and I immediately questioned if they could have scanned deeper or performed the one test that they don't normally do, because that's usually what happens in this show.
She says that a temporal shift would usually leave a tryptamine residue, and I wondered how the hell that would work.
But she can't find any evidence of that, or that he's been anywhere else physically.
She kicks Troy out and tells Picard that while he does not have Irumodic syndrome, he does have a structural defect in his brain that would make him susceptible to it. So he's the captain, and she's the ship's doctor, and it took until the last episode of the show for her to figure out that he has a defect in his brain.
And she said his parietal lobe. Is that what happened in From Beyond? Are From Beyond shenanigans going to start happening?
That was the...
Pineal gland?
Yeah.
Damn it. And she says she only found the defect because she performed a deeper scan. And the fact that she did the scan now instead of later made me suspect that either Beverly had become a better doctor over 200 episodes, or that Picard was in some sort of alternate reality. Riker enters and says Worf hasn't found any indication that Picard left the ship, when Picard is pinged by an admiral.
He goes to Beverly's office, where the admiral tells him that a bunch of Romulans are heading for the neutral zone. He says there's some kind of spatial anomaly in the area, but they don't know what it is. And he tells Picard to join the other 15 starships heading for the neutral zone, but they are not going to enter it.
Picard shifts to the future, where he's upset that he's in the future, and he gets pissed at Geordi for treating him like an invalid, so Geordi decides to play his game, and they go to see Data, as more of the weird peasants mock Picard.
They visit Data at Cambridge, where he now has a position, and he's in a very ornate library room.
Data's housekeeper is the woman from Time's Arrow, which I'm not sure was necessary, but whatever.
Does that mean that he went back in time and pulls her into the future?
It adds a whole nother layer onto this episode. Data asks about the Irumodic syndrome progression, and says that it's possible that Picard is crazy, but there's nothing to disprove his story either, so they're going to perform a bunch of scans.
Picard suddenly finds himself back in Season 1 about to accept his position as captain of the Enterprise, and as he goes through the ceremony, he keeps seeing the jeering people behind everyone else.
He calls everyone to Red Alert, which confuses the hell out of everybody, but they do it. And later he calls a meeting of the bridge officers who say they found nothing unusual, including Troy, who miraculously does not sob through all of her lines, because as I remember, all she did through season 1 was cry.
And he makes a personal log saying he doesn't want to tell anyone about anything that will happen in the future, but I would think his knowledge of the future could be used to avoid some big issues, like Yar getting killed by a tar monster.
And why would he make a log about it if he doesn't want anyone to know about it? He gets called to the bridge, where O'Brien says the Romulans are moving towards the neutral zone due to a spatial anomaly, and they've been ordered to cancel their mission to Farpoint Station.
Picard says they'll ignore Starfleet's orders and continue to Farpoint Station, and they all question him, but he refuses to explain, which, combined with his raving earlier, is a great way to gain their confidence.
He knows that O'Brien is having trouble with the engines, and why, from his knowledge of the past, so he gives him the solution, while at the same time creeping him the hell out by bringing up a bunch of personal stuff about when O'Brien was a kid.
Data shows up, and we get some really dumb attempts to show that Data hasn't learned about human idioms yet, bringing up exactly the stuff from Season 1 that I didn't want to be reminded of.
And in the middle of their conversation, Picard shifts back to Season 7, and he says he can retain more memories of what he experiences as the episode goes on.
Beverly scans him again and says there is a 13% increase in acetylcholine in his hippocampus, showing that he has gained over 2 days of memories in minutes. So is that supposed to mean that every 2 days our acetylcholine goes up by 13%? Does that mean it just keeps going up all our lives as we accumulate memories?
Yeah, that's why when you die, your brain explodes. In a meeting, Picard asked the rest of the officers what happened in Season 1 when he first came aboard, and Troy said everything was normal, he never called Red Alert, and their mission to Farpoint went as expected.
And they note that the anomaly in the neutral zone is the one element common to both apparent timelines. When the meeting is over, Riker asks Troy if she wants to have dinner, and she awkwardly says she's going to be with Worf.
Picard goes to his ready room, where Beverly prepares warm milk and tells Picard to sleep for 8 hours. She's still concerned about Picard's neurological condition, but he says a lot can change in the future, and they make out before she leaves.
Picard wakes up in the future and tries to tell Geordi about the anomaly in the neutral zone, and they reveal that in the future, the Klingons have taken over the Romulan Empire, and they are not on good terms with the Federation.
Geordi keeps playing Picard's games, saying if they're going to go out to the neutral zone, they need a ship, so Picard decides to call in some old favors, and reaches out to future Riker.
Unfortunately, Riker tries to dissuade them, and Picard ends up just getting pissed. Data says that medical ships are still allowed into the area by the Klingons.
And he says there was an outbreak of the Talarian Plague. But isn't that the disease that was extinct, and only one ship in the whole universe still had it? Looks like they should have blown that ship up after all.
They end up boarding a ship run by future Beverly, who reveals that she and Picard were married at one point.
And when they're figuring out how to get into Klingon territory, Geordi suggests Worf, who he thinks may be a member of the Klingon High Council.
When Picard goes off to take an old man nap, Beverly expresses concern about his illness and asks Geordi and Data if they believe that he is really moving through time, but no one says yes.
Picard shifts back to Season 1, expecting to find the Q barrier they originally ran into, but is confused that it isn't there. And he starts shouting for Q, which weirds everyone out even more, and goes to his ready room, but finds himself in Q's court with all of the weird peasant people. Picard gives us a quick recap of the first episode of the show, and asks why he's back in the court again, and demands to know why Shang Tsung isn't there this time.
Q agrees to answer a few yes or no questions, and Picard learns that the Romulans are not involved, Q is not putting humanity on trial again, which turns out to be kind of a lie, and Q is not behind the anomaly, but he is responsible for Picard shifting through time. He says that the trial never ended, and over the 7 years of the show, humanity has failed to grow, which Picard protests.
Q says humanity will be destroyed, but because of Picard, not Q. And then Picard finds himself back on the ship.
He tells Riker to go to Red Alert, and they have a big meeting, and Picard says that Q might be giving him a chance to save humanity through the time shifts.
But he's concerned because he says Q claimed Picard had destroyed humanity before. They determine that Picard should play out each situation in each time period as it happens, and not try and change history, which was a conversation they had in that other episode about time travel, when they were going through that loop.
They get to the neutral zone where Federation and Romulan ships are facing off with each other, and Picard tells Worf to hail the Romulan flagship. But we shift to the future, where old Worf comes on screen.
He says he is not a member of the High Council anymore, and has to refuse their request to come into Klingon territory, and if Riker had given them a ship with a cloaking device, they could have snuck through. And Picard uses Worf's sense of honor to guilt him into allowing them to cross the border, but Worf says he's going to come with them. And I like how Picard admitted that he pulls the honor card because it always works.
And then Worf is like, damn it, you're right.
You know, if you were a man of honor, you would let me have that last piece of cake. Damn it!
But Beverly tells Picard that she'll turn back if they end up in a fight because the ship isn't set up for that.
Maybe she should perform a deeper scan of her ship to find some weapons.
In Season 1, Picard orders them to go into the neutral zone, and Troy asks to speak to him in private, saying that everyone is confused by his orders. He contacts Riker via old footage that looked like it was from the Arsenal of Freedom.
It was.
And he tells him they'll be delayed in picking him up, which is all probably because Jonathan Frakes has changed the most out of all of them over the course of the show.
And they felt that CG was not advanced enough to make a CG Riker image.
Troy tells Picard about her previous relationship with Riker, and Picard smirks and says it won't be a problem.
He then goes to order some tea, but it has not been programmed into the replicator yet, because tea is such a weird, obscure, exotic drink. He made freaking bratwursts in a cup for Loxana. It doesn't know what tea is? Give me a break.
And I was thinking of all the freaking Klingon food that Riker was eating.
Yeah, Worf is the only Klingon in Starfleet, so he, at some point, sat down and said, I gotta program all of these dishes into the replicator. I'm the only one who's gonna eat them.
Picard shifts to the present, where he gets Tomalak to agree that they will each send one ship into the neutral zone to check out the anomaly.
They find the anomaly, which looks like a fancy light show, and at the same time, Season 1 Picard sees the anomaly, but it's much bigger back then.
And in the future, the anomaly is not there. Future Worf tells Picard that Klingon ships have been sent out to find a rogue Federation ship. Beverly says they should go back, but Data says he can modify the main deflector to emit an inverse tachyon pulse to scan beyond the subspace barrier. And I didn't even make that up, that's actually what he says.
And Beverly says they'll stay for 6 more hours, despite Picard's protestations.
She asks to speak to Picard in private and chews him out for challenging her orders, and he admits that it was inappropriate. She says that his Irumodic syndrome may be causing hallucinations, and none of what he thinks he's experiencing may be real.
But after she leaves, Q appears and says he can't help Picard find the anomaly, but he does have help.
What you were and what you are to become will always be with you.
In the present, Picard suggests to Data that he do what he suggested in the future with the tachyon pulse, and Data expresses surprise that Picard would be familiar with any of that. But all the characters in this show always seem to be familiar with things as soon as someone throws out an idea, so I would have been more surprised if he wasn't familiar with those ideas.
Once they shoot the beam, Geordi experiences intense pain, and in sickbay, Beverly says his optic nerves are regenerating.
And Ogawa says she's getting reports of people saying that their scars are healing themselves.
Data says the anomaly is an eruption of anti-time, so I'm glad we're keeping things grounded here.
He says it's similar to the relation of antimatter to normal matter.
And the anomaly is the result of time and anti-time slamming into each other.
And waves of temporal energy that are emitting from it may be disrupting the normal flow of time. In the past, Picard explains to Data what the anomaly is and tells him to send out the tachyon pulse, and says he doesn't understand why it's bigger in the past.
And then he shifts to the future, where the Klingons are attacking. They've knocked out their warp engines, they have no weapons, and their shields are about to collapse, so Beverly decides to surrender, but the Klingons refuse to accept it.
The Enterprise suddenly decloaks, and Riker tells them he'll take care of things. They blow up one of the Klingon ships and chase the other one away.
I'm not sure it was necessary to destroy it. I mean, Beverly's ship was clearly in a region they should not have been in.
That's a good point. And the warp core on Beverly's ship is about to explode, so Riker has everyone beamed over. He chastises Worf for allowing Picard to do what he did, and they argue.
Before Picard tells them to cut it out. And Riker says they need to get back to Federation space at warp 13. So I guess they truly said, F you to that warp tear lady.
Picard yells at Riker, and then Beverly puts him to sleep.
With a well-placed judo chop.
If only. In the present, Beverly says that Geordi's eyes are getting better, and Ogawa has lost her baby. She tells Picard it all seems to be tied into the temporal distortions. She says everyone's cellular structures are reverting to earlier forms, which is causing some injuries to heal.
And later, Data says a scan of the anomaly is almost done, and Picard wants a way to reverse it. After everyone else leaves, Q pops in and makes Picard question his decisions, and snaps and takes Picard 3 billion years in the past.
They're now in ancient France, where the anomaly is also present, and Picard notes that it is even larger. Q shows him a pool and says that life is about to form there for the first time on Earth, but as they watch, he says it didn't happen after all.
Picard realizes that he caused the anomaly, and it disrupted the formation of life on Earth, therefore causing him to destroy humanity.
How deep?
That pool was pretty shallow.
In the past, Picard talks to Data and O'Brien about figuring out how the anomaly formed, and Data says they should be able to scan the anomaly using a confabulatory contrahexagon particle splitter, but such a device is still in the research stage.
And in Season 7, Picard relays that info to Data.
And Data says they do have the device now. Using it, he detects 2 other tachyon pulses like the one they sent in, converging at the center.
Future Picard wakes up and goes to find Riker, who is in 10 Forward with the rest of the officers, and they're discussing Riker's long-standing feud with Worf, where we find out that Troy's dead.
Riker says he never stood in Worf and Troy's way, but Beverly calls him out on it. Picard wanders the halls and asks an ensign how to get to 10 Forward, even though it's right in the name, and the ensign tells him it's in section whatever, even though it's called 10 Forward because it's in 10 Forward.
Picard busts in and says that when the tachyon pulses ran into each other, that started the anomaly, and it started in the future, not the past. Data finds the prospect of the paradox fascinating and starts pontificating on the events, and I liked the dude behind him once Data started going off on this crazy theory. That guy was just like, dude, f*** this, let's get out of here.
And when Data brings up the concept of a paradox, he says it as if a paradox in itself is a scientific concept of some kind, instead of just a basic concept in general, but Picard immediately latches onto it as if it explains everything, just the word paradox.
He says that if they go back to the neutral zone, they can see the initial formation of the anomaly, and once they get there, they do find it, but it's very small.
Data says they should shut down the tachyon streams from the other time periods, and Picard says he'll do that when he goes back.
And even after they disengage the pulses in the past, nothing happens.
In the future, Data and Geordi say they may need to go inside the anomaly and repair the rupture at its focal point by creating a warp shell, which will magically fix everything. But it will need to be done at all 3 time periods for some reason.
Back in Season 1, Tasha demands an explanation for why they're going to go into the anomaly, but Picard says he cannot give them one, and they may not survive, but they're doing it for the greater good, and gives a very moving speech, which convinces them to do what he says. But he only says this to the people on the bridge. What about the other 1,000 people on the ship? I can just imagine some guy looking out the window saying, wait, what? That weird light thing? We're going towards it.
And it would have made a lot more sense for him to just explain things, at least on a basic level, but instead he ended up just looking kind of stupid, telling everybody just to trust him, even though nobody even knows him.
All 3 Enterprises head into the anomaly, reach the center, and make their warp shell bubble things.
And the past Enterprise has issues with warp containment or something, and it explodes. And in the present one, Picard tries to get things under control with the information he has from the past, but that one explodes too.
And on the future ship, Q pops in to tell Picard it was nice knowing him.
And right as the anomaly seems to be closing, that ship explodes. The end.
Picard finds himself back in Q's court, who tells him he saved humanity.
Picard thanks him for his assistance, but Q tells him he's the one who got him into the whole mess in the first place, under orders from the Continuum.
The part about the helping hand, though, was my idea.
Q tells him the trial never ends, and the Continuum wanted to see if humanity had the ability to expand their minds and horizons, and for a brief moment, they did.
Even though the audience figured out what was going on way before the characters did.
So, we have already advanced to a higher plane of existence.
And Q says that charting the unknown possibilities of existence is the true direction of the exploration that awaits Picard. And when Picard asks what Q is trying to tell him, Q just says he'll find out.
Picard finds himself back at the beginning of the episode, where Worf and Troy just finished their romantic holodeck rendezvous, and he's happy to know the stardate.
And he weirds them out before saying he's going to bed. The captain's log tells us that no one else remembers anything weird, and there is no record of any anomaly. So it probably was all in Picard's head.
The rest of the officers are playing poker, and they're discussing all the things Picard told them will happen.
Picard told them that they all drifted apart in the future, but Data says that since the anomaly didn't happen, the future will be different. And Riker wonders if Picard wanted them to prevent certain things from happening, which is exactly what I said he should do when he first found himself in the past.
They're surprised when Picard enters and asks to join the game, and he sits down and says he should have done this a long time ago, and Troy says he was always welcome.
Which is a blatant lie, because now they'll always have to let him win because they don't want to be demoted.
All good things. Overall,
I really expected them to put a lot into the last episode, and being a two-parter, I really thought we'd get some good closure for all the characters at the end, but instead we got the same kind of fake sci-fi mystery we've gotten a million times already, but this time, instead of dragging it out for an entire episode, it's dragged out over 2 entire episodes.
I'm already sensing people shaking their fists at you.
As usual, the audience figured things out way before the supposedly really intelligent characters did, and the episode played out without any real surprises, apart from, for me, the 2 Enterprises blowing up at the end. I did think the climax was better than most of the rest of the episode. A lot of the rest of it felt like fan fiction, with lots of meaningless fan service thrown in instead of actually giving the characters things to do. Tasha Yar was there, but didn't do anything other than remind us that she died. O'Brien was there, but didn't do anything other than give us some lame references to him not being chief engineer yet. Data was there to try to convince us that he's grown as a character over the course of the show, even though he really hasn't, etc. I did like some of the transitions between the time periods, but going back and forth so much and having Picard have to explain things every time just wasted a lot of the runtime that could have been devoted to the characters. This was, in theory, our last chance to see a lot of these characters, but most of them didn't do anything. I liked how they handled the Worf versus Riker angle, and that's what we needed more of in the episode. We learned that Beverly married Picard in the future, but we don't actually get much in the way of actual substance between them, other than the scene where she kisses him, which I thought felt kind of thrown in. I did expect Q to come back, but as usual, it felt like the writers didn't have a firm grasp of his motivations, so they just said, let's do some callbacks to the first episode, and rehash his angle from Q Who, because people like that episode. I'm surprised that the Borg didn't show up, and I think it would have been much more interesting instead of just having the anomaly, and instead of the lame disease that Picard had that made people question him so they could just drag everything out longer without people believing him right away and just questioning whether it's really happening. I thought it would be a lot more interesting to have the Borg be assimilating everyone in the future and pursuing the Enterprise, which would give them more of a sense of urgency and would give them a chance for more character moments as more and more of the main cast get taken over as the episode goes on. That would have given the other characters more to do while Picard is trying to figure out the main mystery and make everything else more interesting than having just scene after scene of Picard trying to remember things. Plus, it would have made Q's attitude feel a bit more consistent by having him directly bring up that episode, instead of having him feel like he randomly changed his personality just to tie back to the first episode. Maybe the Borg could have had a bunch of Romulans and Klingons under their control, which would be a way for Picard to get the Romulans and the Klingons to work together, and that would show Q that they can put aside their differences for the common good. Q's whole motivation still doesn't really make sense and is very inconsistent, but if that was the angle they wanted to go with in this episode, I think having everybody have to work together would have been a lot more effective. I didn't think this episode was bad, apart from the stupid fake science stuff, but for a series finale, it didn't feel very satisfying to me, more like just a longer, subpar version of yesterday's Enterprise, which was way better than this. And on that note, I was really hoping Guinan would show up. They could have had her be the one guiding Picard through the time periods or something, and have kind of a final philosophical discussion between her and Q. I think that could have been interesting. So I feel like they dropped the ball on a lot of things here, and I ended up giving the episode a C-.
That is low.
Yeah, very disappointed.
I gave this one an A.
Wow, okay.
I wonder if part of the reason this finale is regarded as finishing the show on a high note is because the majority of this season was terrible. The writing was much better than most of the season. I'm glad more effort was put into this episode, because otherwise the narrative for this series would be, yeah, the show was really good, but started to fall apart after season 5, and the end was just terrible. You really don't even have to watch the last season.
Well, see, that is my opinion.
I'm sure that's the case for some people, and they probably skip most of season 7 and go right to the finale. The nods and winks to past episodes were fine. I like the ones better that were not blatant and in your face. Like when Tasha stepped in that little puddle of tar in the hallway. And she's like, this is killing me.
When they brought her back in yesterday's Enterprise, they actually did something with her. It actually felt like it meant something. But in here, she's just there, which is pretty much how everything is in this episode.
Yeah, but it was a rehash of the first episode, where nothing happened with her. She was just there.
So you're saying it was pointless?
I thought the pacing for this episode was good. And I agree, there was a lot of fake science stuff going on, even to the point of Data saying, yeah, That concept is super new, which is why it's never come up before. Clearly not, because if it existed earlier, it would contradict things in the show that have already happened. As a standalone story, I enjoyed the bookend nature of this and the first episode, but in terms of content, this was just as Q said. Another spatial anomaly, just another day at the office. They have run into way weirder stuff than this, and been in experiences that seemed way more important.
What was the episode with the 3 datas, having to put the thing in at the same time or whatever?
Yeah, I was thinking about that one, because that was also a multiple time displacement episode. The way the show was putting all of the past, future character stuff was interesting, but I agree, they really could have expanded on it. It was odd to me that for the Riker-Worf-Troy relationship, once they found out about their future, they seemed more concerned about the animosity between Riker and Worf than the fact that Troy died. How did she die? Was it a disease? Did she get blown up? Was she assassinated by future Alexander?
Well, it seemed like she had been dead for a while at that point, so you want them to just start crying about it again?
It would be a nice tribute to her because she cried all the time. And out of everybody, Geordi kind of got shafted in terms of what was going on with his future. Oh yeah, he got married to that virtual sex doll.
Yeah, what are you talking about? He had the perfect future.
I did not like their final solution of just run the ship into the anomaly and everything will fix itself. That is a very tired trope we've seen multiple times in the show, not the least of which was Times Squared, where they literally did the exact same thing for the exact same reasons. I don't care how moving of a speech Picard gave in the Season 1 timeline. I would not have listened to him. I mean, they freaking mutinied that one time because he started singing in the bar. And this time, he's telling them to pull a Janeway and ram the ship into this completely unknown thing 10 minutes after meeting them. Yeah, right. Yes. Let's do what this crazy-ass old man says. Q, at the end, saying realizing possibilities never before considered was kind of silly because they've been through so many things just like this and considered possibilities they haven't before. And really, the person who did it the most in this episode was Data. He kept coming up with new theories and things to try, and Picard would go, yeah, and then everybody would run with it. But it wasn't Picard that expanded his mind, it was Data, who is not part of humanity.
People are going to disagree in the comments, but okay.
Yeah, they're going to disagree with your C- too. You brought up an alternative plot of including the Borg, which I thought was interesting. I had another idea. So Picard had his Irumodic syndrome. He was going crazy. But that was thrown out once things picked up. And it would have added another level of tension if that had interfered with his future self when the syndrome was very advanced, and they were trying to stop the anomaly, and forcing the future crew, who hadn't worked together in 25 years, to start working together again to come up with what they needed to do without Picard's help, would have added another layer of, all of you were always there for me, it solidified that my trust in our friendship was well placed. And then it would have given Q the addition of, well, I guess humanity can work together to achieve more than they're capable of individually. I thought that was a missed opportunity, to not play off of his Irumodic syndrome more.
That makes sense.
I know, that's why I said it.
Yeah, well, I'm just surprised.
I'm just giving you possibilities you've never before considered.
That can't be, that's a paradox.
So we finished the series.
We will be doing an overview of this season and then an overview of the series as a whole,
where we will show all of our grades for every episode, including the ones where we now regret making those decisions.
Unfortunately, we can't travel back in time to fix our mistakes.
So I'm sure there's some people watching this video that said, I'm not going to watch all those freaking reviews of those dumb episodes. I'm just going to wait till they get to the finale. So we did, so you're welcome. But now you're never going to know what happened to that train on the holodeck.
The most interesting character.
The train. Thanks for watching.